Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Mr. Payne bringing you Graphing Lines Review. The first topic we're going to talk about is the x-intercept and where the line crosses the x-axis, and the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. The b, or the initial value, the start, the cost, or the fee. Remember those key words when you're writing an equation or dealing with word problems. One of the things that students always forget is that when I'm graphing a point, it is the x and the y, and whenever I have values in that and I'm writing it into an equation, then it's if I have the equation y equals mx plus b, I really know a couple things there. I can plug my x's in and my y's in. Students always forget that we're given so much more than we remember, that could be plugged into a formula. So let's remember those key things. The next thing we're going to talk about is slope, rise over run, or average rate of change. These words are huge, the rise over run. That helps me when I have to graph it. The average rate of change. On the Regents exam, we are always talking about the average rate of change. The M, the cost per something, okay? So when I'm talking about my formula, my slope, it's the cost per something, per month, per day, per hour. So the key word in there is per. That's what we're looking for. So to recap, the key words here, my y-intercept is my initial value, my startup, and my slope is my per, what it costs per month or per day. When we talk about slope, there are 4 different types of trends. Remember that my positive is going from left to right, it's going uphill. My negative, going from left to right, is downhill. My 0, if I drew a 0 slope, I could put the number 0 on it and it won't roll anywhere. Okay, so y equals a number, no x. So y would equal, in this case, let's call that 5. For no slope, if I drew my x and y axes, my line would look like this. And how do I remember that? N, O, no slope. I break up the word no, so it's NO, no slope. And if I were to write an equation, it would say x equals, in this case, it would say 3. One last thing for average rate of change and slope that we want to remember. We want to remember the formula of y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We want to be able to apply that formula in all word problems given a table or whatever, however it's given to you. Let's talk about how to graph a line by using the table method. The first thing you have to do is get y by itself, put it into your calculator under y equals, hit second graph, copy the table, plot the points. Remember, for when you're copying your table, you really, for linear, you want to use 3 or more. So 3 or more. Plot the points, collect the line with the arrows, if no domain X restrictions. So what does that mean with no domain restrictions? Let's reiterate that. If it said that it wants you to graph a line from -5, which is less than or equal to X, less than or equal to, let's say, 4, that is a domain restriction. Okay, it only wants your table to go from -5 to 4. Y equals mx plus b. Get y alone, find the b and plot the y-axis, find the slope, and move along the graph to make the points. Remember, when you're using the y equals and m equals and b equals, you have to say on your paper m equals, b equals. Connect the line with arrows if no domain restrictions. Cover up graphing intercepts. Cover up the y in the equation and solve for x. Plot the answer on the x-axis. Cover up the x in the equation and solve for the y. Plot answer on y-axis. Connect line with arrows and no domain restrictions. We don't use this graphing by intercepts too often, but it is easy and you can do that. One of the things that I want you to write down as part of my must-haves that was not mentioned in these 5 and 6 step directions, and I'll put a star by it. Make sure you use a ruler, which will be provided to you on the final exam, and make sure you label. So now all the must-haves are there. So you better make sure that you have to always solve to get y by itself. You have to label or come up with some type of work, either a table or your m equals and b equals. You have to connect the lines and plot points, 3 or more points. Connect the lines with arrows using a ruler and make sure you label your lines. How to determine if it is a linear function. In mapping, each x only has one arrow coming from it. So that means if I had mapping is this, when I have my circles like this, and I have my x's here, and I have 1, 2, 3. Sorry, my stylus isn't working real well today. And I have 5 and I have 6. I can have an arrow here, I can have an arrow here, and I can have an arrow there. Notice that none of my x's repeat. It's okay to go to the same y, but as long as they don't have the same thing on the x's. With points, the x's do not repeat. Remember that. That's really key there. Make sure you're paying attention to open and closed dots. And then my vertical line test. Remember on the Regents exam, we cannot call it the VLT. I know we use that for short in class sometimes, but make sure you state vertical line test. If you draw a line, vertical lines through the graph, each vertical line only hits the picture once. One of the other things to determine if it's a linear function or not is the R value. So you may want to make a note on that, R value. Remember that if you turn on your diagnostics and you hit Stat, Calc 4, and it gives you a R value that's super close to 1, if not 1, then it's going to be a linear function. You know it's definitely a linear function if my R value equals 1. So R equals 1. Or negative 1. How to write an equation of a line? Well, there's several different ways we can do that. Given a graph, find the b where it hits the x-axis, count the rise over run, and put in spots y equals mx plus b. Given 2 points, put the points in L1 and L2 by hitting stat enter, and find the linear regression. Stat, and this right arrow means calc, right? So stat, calc 4, enter, and it gives me my linear regression. Given the average rate of change, slope or per, and the y-intercept or initial, the initial is the b, the average rate is the m, place in y equals mx plus b, or identify the numbers. Remember that your calculator is a really, really good tool. And the last thing that I'm going to add before the end of the video is that when we're talking about writing an equation of a line, it's given by tables. And once we have a table, we can use my stat calc 4, right? And one of the things that I want to bring up at this point is sequencing, because that's the next video that I'm going to do for review. But it kind of ties in together with this graphing of a line. Because the arithmetic sequence, remember, and you can write that down, arithmetic, right at the bottom of this paper, because arithmetic goes along with linear lines and linear regressions. Okay, if I know that a sequence is arithmetic, that means my y is changing by adding or subtracting, or it states it in the reading that it's arithmetic. I can create a table, punch that table into my calculator by using this method right in here, and it will give me a arithmetic sequence formula. So I just want to make sure that you remember that this is all tied together about linear and what linear is all about. It has a constant rate of change, and we talk about that with slope. That's what makes it a linear function. Okay, have a great evening, and hope you have a great day at school.